Hello?
Steve, it's Grant. How are you, mate?
I'm really well, Grant. How you doing?
Not too bad. Listen, I'm trying to get my head around what's happening in Italy. Now, I know you spend a lot of time there. What's the story?
Well, I think it's really important. And I think it's a lot more complex than you might imagine from reading the newspapers. I think it's about a lot more than just contemporary politics. I think it's about Italian culture. I think it's about Italian identity. And I think it's a lot about history.
What are we talking here?
Well, at least a couple of thousand years, I'd say. But hey, what you should do is you should actually come over here and have a look for yourself. I'm going to be in Italy next week. Why don't you get on a plane and I'll show you around, and you'll see what you make of it and you can draw your own conclusions.
With every passing day, the world of finance seemingly becomes more complex and harder to figure out. Financial information is distilled into sound bites for an increasingly time-poor audience, when, more than ever before, a deeper, less superficial understanding of the many factors affecting the global economy is required in order to fully understand both the risks and opportunities. In this series, my goal is to travel with people whose understanding of a set of financial situations dwarfs my own, and to take the time needed to dig beneath the headlines and improve my knowledge of both the situations in question and the investment implications that surround them. And the best way I know of doing that properly is by going on the road. Italy is a spectacular country, rich in history and culture, but its economy is struggling, and its place at the heart of the European Union is under threat. Between the current populist uprising and the country's fragile banking system, that threat suddenly looks very real. To try and get a better understanding of the situation, I've travelled to the home of my friend Steve Diggle, founder of Vulpes Investment Management, so he can help me understand the history and the investment implications behind the situation unfolding here.
This is such a beautiful part of the world you've found for yourself here. It's spectacular. But there's so much going on in this part of the world right now, and it feels as though it again has reached some kind of tipping point.
I think what's happening in Italy is probably not widely understood. It's a complicated story, and it comes directly out of a lot of history. And this is something you and I have talked about a lot. This is that the short-termism in markets means that people very often ignore these very long-term historical situations. I've always been fascinated by history, and a lot of what I have done in my career as both an investor and a trader is look at these long-term patterns, much deeper, longer-term context than what's happening in the next 30 seconds. Where's the euro going to be tomorrow? Where's the S&P going to be in 3 weeks' time? I mean, that's important from a trading perspective, but unless you really understand where something has come from, which means you really have to look at its long-term history, you really can't understand what's going on. And I think very often you can use history to teach you an awful lot of things about the current situation, particularly where people have made horrible mistakes. And I think one of the mistakes people are making now is they just assume Italy, it's a bit of a basket case, none of this really matters, they'll roll over, as they always do, and everything will roll on. It might be different this time. So, I'd like to take you to a few of my favourite places. You've never been to Florence, which I find amazing. We have to go to Florence, which is where it all began, centre of Italian banking in the 16th, 14th, 15th, 16th centuries, and also one of the most beautiful cities on earth. We'll go to Siena, their ancient rival, also very somewhat contemporary.
There I have been before.
And then we'll come back and I'll show you Cortona, which is just over the hills here. It's a complicated place. You just wonder, why doesn't it work better? Why isn't it wildly successful? Some of the most talented people in the world, some of the best brands in the world. Why is it such a perpetual mess? And I've got my own theories, and we'll talk a bit about that when we're on the road.
All right, well, let's go see some of it, shall we?
Okay.
All right.
The first leg of our journey will take us to the spectacular city of Florence, where modern-day banking began some 7 centuries ago. But on the way, I wanted to find out how Steve's love affair with this wonderful country began.
I've been coming to Italy since I was a teenager, and I've loved this part of the world ever since. I was a real fan of Renaissance history, which I studied for both O and A level. So when I was 16, 17, I came out here to look at the stuff. on a Euro-rail. Remember those Euro-rail passes?
Yeah.
You could go everywhere in Europe for like, what was it, 40 quid or something?
Yep.
And I literally was breathless when I saw the Duomo for the first time. It was just the most amazing thing when you've walked 3 days through this countryside. Anyway, so I just loved it. People were so nice to you when you're just walking along. You know, someone gave me some tomatoes out of a garden.
They gave them or threw them at you?
She just gave them to me. It was very nice of her. And you know, people offer me drinks. It was this incredible warmth of the people, excellent food, beautiful countryside, and even more beautiful cities with all of this, you know, extraordinary profundity of ancient art, architecture.
Well, that's always what strikes me on my rare trips back to Europe. You forget living in Asia, where everything is either 1,000 years old or it was built yesterday.
Yeah.
You know, there's nothing in that. And I went to see my dad in Paris a few years ago. The first time I've been to Paris in forever. And I was just staring at the architecture because I hadn't seen anything like it. You don't see it in the US.
Well, I think France and Italy are totally blessed in that they have this beautiful, gentle, bucolic countryside. Look at that.
Yeah.
And also this incredible beauty by man. So here we are in Florence, and there's Brunelleschi's masterpiece, Il Duomo, Giotto Tower to the left, the River Arno, and there's the Ponte Vecchio. The Ponte Vecchio being where all the gold cellars are, so you'll like that.
Yes.
So the Ponte Vecchio is the reason why the gold cellars are there is because if you had your business on the bridge, you didn't have to pay your full municipal taxes because you weren't actually inside the city walls. So the reason why London Bridge and these ancient medieval bridges used to be full of merchants is because they were actually avoiding paying tax.
But this is such a cradle of finance, this city. I mean, there's so many things happen here that have shaped everything that we know today.
Yeah, it was the financial centre of the Italian states for centuries, and now synonymous with the Medici. But before the Medici, the richest family in Europe were the Bardis, and they were based here. And they were the people who initially set up an Italian banking network that went across all of Europe. They were the first people to really internationalize banking. And it's interesting that in Italy, unlike, say, most of the rest of Europe, where the idea of lending for interest and profit was banned by the church. Yeah. So principally an area that only minorities, especially the Jewish, were involved in. But in Italy, it was a respectable profession, wealthy families, international organizations. So the Bardi established this international, this pan-European network, which was their downfall because they lent an awful lot of money to Edward III, King of England, who spent it on building a huge army and then decided not to pay it back. So that bankrupted the Bardi, and that was the end of them. And into that vacuum came the Medici, who, you know, increasingly became the most powerful people in this town with their new innovation, double entry bookkeeping.
Oh, exactly.
Double entry bookkeeping. That was the financial revolution of the 15th century that allowed them to continue to control this vast empire